Welcome to the PA Books Podcast. PA Books is a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. This program features interviews with authors of books on Pennsylvania people, history, sports, business, nature, and politics. We hope you enjoy this podcast. This week on PA Books, Ben Bradlee Jr., author of The Forgotten.
Ben Bradlee Jr., author of The Forgotten, How the People of One Pennsylvania County Elected Donald Trump and Changed America. The one Pennsylvania county you picked is Luzerne County. Of all the counties in the country, why did you pick Luzerne County to write about?
Well, I was fascinated, like many journalists, with the rise of Donald Trump. And here was the most unusual candidate for president, perhaps, that we've ever had, a candidate who said and did things that would have destroyed any other presidential candidacy. And I was looking for an interesting, a different way to write about his election. And combing through the vote in the three Rust Belt swing states which decided the election, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I discovered Luzerne County in northeast Pennsylvania. County seat Wilkes-Barre and Hazleton is the second city, which played a critical role in Trump's election. This is a traditionally Democratic county, economically depressed still, and hadn't voted for a Republican for president since 1988, George Bush Sr. And Obama had carried it twice, but it surged in the other direction for Trump in 2016. And he piled up such a margin in that one county that it was 60% of his winning margin in Pennsylvania. He won the state by 44,000 votes, and 26,000 odd votes of those votes came from Luzerne County. So without this one county, he wouldn't have won the state, or perhaps the presidency, to the extent Pennsylvania's demographics are similar to Michigan's and Wisconsin's. So I decided to visit Luzerne less than a month after the election and start poking around.
Was that your first time visiting there?
Yes, yeah. And I began interviewing Trump voters with a view to seeing if this might be a window into the election, a different way of doing a deep dive on the Trump phenomenon, if you will. And after I decided that it was that was a viable approach, and after interviewing about 100, I narrowed the list of about 12 people that the book focuses on, including Lou Barletta, who's the congressman from that area, now running for Senate against Bob Casey. And the way I chose these people was largely subjective. I think that they represented different slices of the Trump constituency and had good stories to tell, and told them in an interesting way.
How did you separate the people who voted for Trump for people who did not? I mean, how did you know who to ask of the 100?
You know, I did what reporters do when you came to town. I was looking for Trump voters, and so I visited with a newspaper editor, another reporter. This is at the Times Leader, one of the two papers in Wilkes-Barre, and interviewed 4 or 5 state reps and state senators, people who had their finger on the pulse of the county, a talk show host, and business people. Wanted to learn who the leading Trump supporters were, and contacted them, and one will lead you to another.
Were people open to talking to you, or were they a little skeptical of this
Maybe
guy?
a little skeptical from at first. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, a very blue state, so they pegged me for liberal right away, and maybe we're a little suspicious of that. But you know how it works in journalism and reporting. I think if you approach people respectfully and listen and ask them to share their story, my experience is that they basically are flattered by that and want to talk.
When you first visited Luzerne County, what were your first impressions for people who have never been there? What do you see when you go there?
Well, I'd say it's fraying at the edges. You know, this is a town that Luzerne County, coal was the backbone of that county. Coal is long gone, replaced by manufacturing, which is also mostly gone. Either jobs lost abroad or to automation. And these factories are no more. Used to be a thriving garment industry there, dress factories, run mostly by women, and those are gone. And there's the beginnings of a warehouse business there. The Luzerne, it's in the Hazleton area, sits at the intersections of Interstates 80 and 81. And that's a popular destination for warehouses like Amazon and a few others. But those are minimum wage jobs. And it's still, I think the unemployment rate has gone down a bit along with the national unemployment rate. So things are perhaps a little bit better. But young people mostly leave because they see limited economic opportunity there.
Is there any reason for them to stay?
Not really. If they want to earn a big salary, if somebody ambitious and wants to earn, you know, $80,000, maybe $100,000 a year, those jobs are hard to find in Luzerne.
Now, one of the things you write about is the influx of Hispanic immigrants or people of Hispanic nationality moving there from New Jersey and New York. Mm-hmm. And you say in 2000, Hazleton was 95% white and 5% Hispanic, but by 2016, 16 years later, the percentage had jumped from 5% to 52%.
Right.
Did you get much of a sense for how that is going down with people who are longtime residents?
Well, there's been some white flight. I think there's still some tensions, but I think both sides are getting more and more used to each other. There's an outfit called the Hazleton Integration Project, which has sprung up, partly funded by Joe Madden, the manager of the Chicago Cubs, who is from Hazleton and is trying to help smooth the way for the newly arrived Hispanic immigrants. But I think people are still feeling their way on that.
What's the attraction for Hispanics? Why would they want to move to Hazleton or to Wilkes-Barre?
Because of these warehouse jobs that are there, and minimum wage, and a much lower cost of living than in New York or New Jersey.
Now, you mentioned that
these are mostly Dominicans, sorry.
You mentioned that the area was traditionally Democratic and they voted for a lot of Democratic presidents. Why, going back historically, was it Democratic?
Well, it was Republican way back. You know, it was somewhat cyclical. It was a strong union town and working class, and I think those people traditionally have gravitated towards the Democrats. But I think in this day and age, parties are becoming less and less attractive to people, that they don't toe the party line, and are more inclined to vote the person, if you will, rather than be tied by parties or issues. This was a great attraction for Trump. I mean, a lot of his vote in Luzerne was from Democrats crossing over to vote Republican. And they told me that they didn't leave the party left them.
So when you started interviewing people, what kind of questions did you ask?
Well, I would start by asking about, their own personal story and what led them to Trump, and just trying to understand the phenomenon better. These are people who felt marginalized by falling wages. They felt isolated. They felt that the huge swaths of the country weren't paying attention to them. They felt that a culture dominated by Hollywood and network television had become a liberal culture, essentially, that condescended to them. And Trump came along and filled a void. They felt that Hillary Clinton mostly ignored them and condescended to them when she was paying attention to them. Her famous comment, "the deplorables."
Was there much variety to the reasons people voted for Donald Trump, or were you kind of hearing the same story over and over?
Well, some variety, but I think it was more cultural than economics. They felt in a mood to knock over the table and break some china, and take their chances with this very unusual candidate. One local Democratic state senator in Luzerne, John Udacek, told me that while Obama had hope and change, Trump had knocked down the door and change. They wanted to send a message with this guy, and I think some did it with some trepidation, not knowing exactly what the result would be, but felt in the mood to really send a message.
What did the Democratic Party do wrong to lose those voters?
I think they took them for granted and felt that they would always be there. Hillary Clinton didn't spend, I don't believe, any time in Luzerne County, even though she has family roots up the road in Scranton. And I think that she mostly took them for granted. She was largely trying to replicate the Obama path to the presidency, which was minority voters, women, affluent suburban types, highly educated. And despite her husband's advice, Bill Clinton, who had a much better relationship with the white working class than Hillary did, she largely wrote off that group.
Well, Joe Biden, also from Luzerne County,
Scranton,
North
Lackawanna
County.
Yeah.
What is it that he has in connection to the white working class?
He's got a better common touch, if you will. I think that Biden could have beaten Trump. Just a gut hunch. And the question is whether his time has passed or whether he's going to give it another go, and whether people might think he's too old. But I think that the Democrats have to nominate somebody with blue-collar cred, and that Biden has that, and that Hillary, for all her accomplishments as a senator, a former Secretary of State, First Lady, we probably never had someone with a better resume run for president, but she just seemed to rub a lot of people the wrong way.
There are some comments in your book about the Democrats look down on us, or they think they're better than us. Is there something to that?
Well, you know, this stuff gets very squishy and subjective. You know, you almost have to put an individual voter on the couch, and as their psychiatrist, if you will, and ask them that. But people felt that. People felt taken for granted, and you know, they say you fall in love with your therapist because you feel listened to, and I think that these people felt that Trump listened to them, and they could relate to him, and they felt that Hillary did not listen to them.
How often would you get into an interview with somebody and think, this is just great?
Well, that happened quite a few times. I was learning a lot, you know, coming from a blue state, Massachusetts, and learning how a different constituency thinks about issues in different ways. And again, I was struck by looking at the map of the election results, county by county. It's a sea of red with only blue pockets on either coast, and it's a reminder that we're probably a center-right country. So I was learning a lot, and one thing that still stands out to me as heart-wrenching was the story of one of the women that I profiled in the book, Lynette Villano. She's in her early 70s, and told a heart-wrenching story about how the election came between her and her grandson. This election did cause problems within families. Trump was such a contentious candidate, such a polarizing candidate, that there were often times when people didn't know how to handle rifts in a family. But Lynette was one of those people. Remember Trump's famous quote in the campaign that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any votes. Well, Lynette Villano was one of those. And she, on the day after the election, she texted her grandson, who at the time was a senior at Tulane University, and told him how happy she was that Trump had been elected. Well, the kid responded harshly, and texted her back that this is one of the worst things that ever could happen in America, and that Trump is going to take the country down the tubes. And she shared with me the entire text exchange and gave me permission to use it in the book. So I reprinted a lot of it verbatim. And to me, it illuminates the philosophical divide that exists in this country, or that was caused by the election, and how some families were torn apart.
Do you remember how she voted in the previous presidential elections?
Oh, she's pretty hardcore Republican. She's, you know, what I would call an establishment Republican. Voted, you know, well, she voted Republican. Locally, she voted for Arlen Specter back in the day. You know, that kind of Republican.
I want to ask you about another couple, Jessica Harker and her husband Ray. And you're right, in the 2016 election, Jess went all in for Trump, despite the fact that Ray thinks the president is a satanic fraud.
This was a really interesting couple. I wanted to profile an evangelical. Luzerne County is predominantly Catholic, but there's a growing evangelical population. And this is a very important constituency for Trump. Evangelicals comprise perhaps 50% of his entire vote, and he carried 80% of the evangelicals. And this woman, Jessica Harker, had been raised in Michigan in a Democratic household, met her husband, Ray, who was a born-again Christian and became active in Republican politics. And he mentored his wife in both politics and religion. So Trump came along in 2016, and unlike most of the evangelical establishment, he thought Trump was a fraud. He thought, you know, any woman who had, any president, any person really who had an affair with a porn star, by definition, was out as far as an evangelical is concerned. But to the leadership, the most important issues were, first, are you against abortion? And second, can you deliver and appoint conservatives to the Supreme Court? So he delivered on those. And Jessica liked the Trump style and the cut of his jib, if you will. And but Ray thought he was a fraud, and so this really came between them, and they had to get into counseling to help bridge their differences. And she would tell him, "We can't talk about Trump at home. It's a no-fly zone," she called it.
When you interviewed them, were they together?
No, I interviewed them separately.
So you didn't get to see the interaction between them?
No, not really. But I got a good flavor for it.
Were there any people who you were just amazed that they voted for Trump, who were just didn't fit the mold?
No, not really. I'm not sure what the mold is. I mean, people, it's private, you know. They vote for a candidate for their own reasons. But this is a guy who they just could relate to. They felt that again, that he listened to them, and he was what the country needed then.
Any of them college educated, white collar?
Some are white collar. Most are probably not college educated. I would guess maybe half and half.
You do interview a fellow by the name of Steve Smith, a former Ku Klux Klansman and skinhead who in 2012 was elected to the Luzerne County Republican Committee, thereby vaulting from the white underground into local political mainstream. What was he like to interview?
Well, he was a reluctant interview, distrusted the press, but he's become a public figure in Luzerne County. I chose him because race, let's face it, was an underlying factor in the election, if not a prominent factor. After all, Trump rose to prominence within the Republican Party on the strength of championing the birther movement, which alleged that Obama had not been born in the United States. And, you know, that's a lie. And, of course, he'd been born in the United States. He proved it. It was humiliating for him to prove. But Trump kept doubting it. And that was what pushed him up, way up in the polls early on in 2015 when he first announced. And to me, Steve Smith illustrated how Trump had legitimized the white underground. They felt comfortable coming out and talking about white rights and not white supremacy. They call it white nationalism. You know, they're very anti-affirmative action. And this guy got himself elected to a local Republican county office. And I thought that was rather remarkable. And he thought that Trump was the greatest thing since sliced bread and had helped legitimize white nationalism.
Was he kind of the exception among the people you talked to, or did you kind of get an undercurrent that there was some of that?
Well, no, I mean, he was the exception in terms of its baldness, if you will. But Trump's core issue, perhaps, was illegal immigration, which had racial overtones. One of the guys that I profile in the book was Lou Barletta, who, the local congressman running for Senate against Bob Casey now. And in some ways, he was Trump before Trump. In 2006, as mayor of Hazleton, he got this city ordinance passed, preventing businesses from doing business with illegals and making English the official language, etc., which was later ruled unconstitutional. But he rode that issue to Congress. And so when Trump emerged in 2015, Barletta was attracted to him and was one of his earliest supporters in Congress.
And you write that the city spent $1.4 million defending the lawsuit against the bill that the city council.
Yeah, they were sued by the ACLU and others, and they had to pay $1.4 million in court costs.
Was the reaction to the Hispanic influx into Hazleton one of the drivers behind the support for Trump?
In Luzerne?
Yeah.
I think it was. I think illegal immigration was an important issue. Yeah, I do.
Now, it's hard not to read your name without realizing you have a rather famous name. But for people who are not familiar with you and your father, what was your father noted for?
Well, he was editor of the Washington Post. He died 5 years ago, and he was most noted for being the editor when the Post broke the Watergate story, which led to the resignation of President Nixon.
And your mother's maiden name was Saltonstall. Is that that's a long time Massachusetts politics name?
Yeah, it's an old Yankee name in Massachusetts. She was distantly related to Leverett Saltonstall, who was a former Massachusetts senator. And they were divorced when I was about 8 or 9. And my mother and I settled in Boston, and my father moved to Washington.
When did you decide you wanted to get into the newspaper business?
Well, out of college, I went into the Peace Corps in Afghanistan, of all places. And the fellow I worked for there was a newspaper editor at a small paper in California, the Riverside Press Enterprise. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do after I got out of the Peace Corps. You know, who really knows what they want to do at age 23 or 4? This guy suggested, you know, I'd been growing up in Boston. I was curious about seeing California. He said, why don't you come out and work for me? He was returning to the paper after working in the Peace Corps, taking a leave of absence. And so I went out there and worked as a general assignment reporter. I wasn't really conscious of following my father, as it were.
What year was this?
This was early 70s. This was 72, 73 in there, just as Watergate was happening.
Were you treated differently by your coworkers, or were you treated like,
well, he wasn't really,
you better show your stuff, or
oh, definitely,
something?
Definitely. He wasn't by any means a household name yet. He was getting there. And yeah, there's perhaps a little suspicion that you're a patronage hire, and you damn well got to work twice as hard as the next guy to show that you can cut the mustard.
How did you learn the newspaper business?
Well, at this paper, really. And, you know, you do everything. You're a cop reporter, general assignment, you know, features, a little bit of everything. And, you know, the newspaper business is really fun, I think, and a place where you can still make a difference, even though journalism in this country is really hurting. Newspapers especially, because of the influence of the internet.
How did you find yourself in Boston?
Well, I landed in Boston You mean after my
professionally?
Professionally, yeah. Well, I worked for 3 or 4 years at the paper in Riverside, California, and got very involved in a murder case that I was covering out there, which led to a book, and then I did another book, and then I got an offer to join the Boston Globe, which was my hometown paper, and so I came back east to do that.
And you have a Pulitzer to your name.
Well, Pulitzer, I was in charge of it's a team thing, not an individual thing. My last job at the Boston Globe was to be, I was deputy managing editor in charge of projects and investigations, and our investigation unit was called the Spotlight Team, and this was 4 reporters, and we got involved in investigating sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, which led to a series of articles in 2002 documenting through internal church records how priests in the Boston Archdiocese were passed around from parish to parish despite the senior leadership of the church knowing that these were troubled priests. And that story just took off like no story I've ever been involved with before, and it went national and international. But as you know, here in Pennsylvania, it's still percolating with the release of this grand jury report by your Attorney General.
Boston is a pretty Catholic town, so how was it received there?
Well, we were concerned about that initially, but the reaction was, go get them. They were outraged, people. Catholics were outraged that the church sanctioned this and knew about it and swept it under the rug and tried to cover it up. So it was very well received. The church apologized. Cardinal Law, the Cardinal Bernard Law, the late Cardinal Law, who was head of the Boston Archdiocese, apologized profusely for a year or more in an effort to save his job, ultimately unsuccessful effort. He resigned, but was given a very sweet landing spot in Rome, where the Pope appointed him head of one of the Vatican churches, and that caused some more outrage. But Catholics, rank and file Catholics, are very upset about this.
That was made into a movie.
It was, surprisingly so.
And you were portrayed in it.
Well, I was, and I had a little cameo, which was fun. Yeah, you know, we thought that our work was essentially done, if you will, when 2 young women, pretty inexperienced Hollywood producers, showed up at our door, and this is like 5 years after the story broke, maybe 2007 in there, and they said, oh, we love this story and we want to make a movie about how you guys broke it. And we didn't take them seriously at first. They didn't have many credits, and but we talked to them. And they went off for another 5 years or so trying to get the movie made in Hollywood, but kept getting the doors slammed in their face because it was a controversial subject and a lot of people weren't willing to tackle it. But then all of a sudden the financing came together, a good director, a good screenwriter, and an A-list ensemble cast, and pretty good movie.
You're happy with the way it turned out?
Yeah.
You're outraged at what they did with your book?
No. It was not. It was based on not a book, but our coverage, and we knew they were sincere, and we trusted them, and we all talked to them at length, and showed them some of our contemporaneous notes at the time. So these guys were serious, and they did it right, I think.
You also wrote a book about Ted Williams that you say took 10 years to write.
That's embarrassing, isn't it, to say that? But I'm a great Red Sox fan, and Williams had been a sort of a childhood hero of mine, and very interesting man with a complicated life. And I had just left the paper and resigned from the paper to write this, and took my time, had a lot of fun, and 600 interviews. That takes some time. So yeah, but this Trump book I had to treat as if I was on deadline, so that took me a lot less time.
How long from, over what period of time did you do the interviews for this Trump book?
From December 2016 to June of 2018.
And did you go back afterwards to see, after Trump had been in office for a while, what people's reaction had been?
Yeah, I did. I mean, the reporting really didn't stop for a year and a half into his presidency. So I was well aware of what these people thought of how he was doing in office, and have stayed in touch with them even since the book closed in June. And they say that the 12 people that I feature in the book, they say that if the 2020 election were to be held tomorrow, 11 of them would enthusiastically vote for Trump again. Only one has slipped into the undecided column.
You interviewed somebody, Luzerne County manager David Pedri, and he suggested to one group that the corrections officers, that voting for Trump would be against their economic self-interest. He was working for the Democratic Party. Voting for Trump would be against their economic self-interest. And he said they didn't care. They were all for voting him in anyway because it was time to shake things up. So there were people who knew that it was against their economic interests and voted for him anyway?
Yeah. I don't think everyone votes their pocketbook. I mean, a lot of people do. But there are some things that trump, no pun intended, economics, and those are the cultural issues. And I think that these prison guards and others, it was a send a message vote. They really wanted to upset the apple cart and take their chances with this guy.
Do you think this is a trend, or is it they just wanted to get it out of their system and then go back to normal?
Well, I think that's an important question to consider, because going forward, it'll be interesting to see whether this is a movement or more a cult of personality, and therefore a one-off. And I think we'll know more after the midterm elections coming up soon, and certainly by 2020. I wouldn't, I'm sorry, just to finish that thought, I wouldn't bet against Trump. As controversial as he is, he's one of the few politicians that I've seen who doesn't seem to be interested in expanding his base. He seems to tend to his base and not care about attracting other voters. He behaves more as president of his base than he does president of the country. On election night, when he won, he did extend an olive branch out to the other side, saying it was time to unite the country. But since then, he's done nothing to try to unify the country. Even 2 weeks after he was elected, he began going out. I think at that point he called them thank you rallies. But he's held these rallies, dozens of them, since being elected president. It's the permanent campaign. And he goes to favored red states or states where he'll get a good reception. And I think one of the one of the more important questions going forward is whether a Democrat will emerge who will essentially run on a platform of trying to unite the country again.
Is it unitable? Or is the gap between the left and right and the red and the blue too wide to bring together within a reasonable amount of time?
Well, I'm not sure. But I found even the Trump people, as dug in as they are, concerned about the extent to which we're polarized as a country, and thinking that it is important to be able to talk more to the other side, but they don't know how to do it. And I don't think the left knows how to do it either. I think this is a question of presidential leadership, and Trump is not interested in doing that. I think he's calculated that he can win re-election with 45% of the vote. After all, 2 out of the last 3 presidents, Trump and George W. Bush, were elected without winning the popular vote. You don't have to get to 50% anymore. You've got 2 dug-in sides with about 42, 43% of the vote. If you had a credible third-party candidate, that would split the vote further. And even as it was with the Libertarians and the Green Party, they comprised 5% of the vote, and that was enough to tip the election.
So does it make sense for the Democratic Party in 2020 to try to appeal to the middle, or to do like the president's doing and appeal strongly to their base and hoping they can get enough of 50% plus one?
Well, good question. To win the nomination of either party now, you have to go to the extremes. The left has to cater to its base and the right to theirs. And then the challenge is how to work yourself back into the middle without being called a hypocrite. And the people making most of the noise on the left now, Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, Kamala Harris from California, Cory Booker from New Jersey.
There are a couple of self-proclaimed Democratic socialists about to be elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives.
So they have a constituency too.
So how did we get to that point? That you always hear writers say that most people are in the middle, but the power is at the extremes.
Yes, yeah. Because you have to win over the base to get the nomination. Those are the party activists who get the ball rolling for you, and it's a really delicate dance to get back to the middle.
So how can both parties use your book as a tool in the next election?
Well, I think unifying the country is as a voter, that would be my top priority. And I don't want to start to get preachy here or sound like I'm running for office myself, But I guess I do sort of hope that this book, which is about listening, it's listening reporting, I guess I do hope that it might, in a small way, contribute to dialogue. But the real way we're going to get there is through presidential leadership. This is a leadership issue. And unless a president or presidential candidates talk about it, I don't think it's going to get done.
Have you gotten much reaction to your book in northeastern Pennsylvania?
Well, I went back there to the Luzerne County a week after it was published, and did a couple of events at the local bookstore and at Penn State Hazleton, and there was a lot of interest. I think there's some local pride at being featured in a book, and it was really nice to see the voters. I mean, the people that I featured in the book and they were all, being interviewed and I think enjoying their little star turn. And it was nice to get back there.
Well, one last thing I want to ask about is a word that is new to me, and that is Hainabonics. Can you explain what Hainabonics is?
Well, apparently, people in Luzerne County have a funny way of talking. And there's a YouTube, somebody told me about different figures of speech that they use in the context of being attracted to Trump, who himself uses words like big league or big Lee, and they thought that his informal manner of speech was made him more relatable than, say, Hillary, who spoke more formally. And I've forgotten, if you have it in front of you, maybe you can help me out, but there are some phrases, turns of phrase.
We have Jeet? No, Jew?
Yeah.
Did you eat or no, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it turns out that there's a YouTube video of this that shows a mock professor teaching a class how to speak Hainabonics.
You're working on another book?
No, not yet. I'm out flogging this one.
Well, we've been speaking with Ben Bradlee Jr. He is the author of this book, The Forgotten: How the People of One Pennsylvania County Elected Donald Trump and Changed America. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
You've been listening to a podcast of PA Books, a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Full episodes of PA Books, as well as other PCN programs, are available to stream with the PCN app. Visit PCNTV.com or the App Store for details. Like us on Facebook.